So they're right there.
They're in the 8th spot, Jason. I mean, that's the craziest thing.
No,
It is just
no.
wild. I don't know how they've done it. John Morant has been incredible. The guy who I actually, the guy who I've been just kind of enthralled by is Brandon Clark, who has freaking jetpacks in his knees. It's unbelievable. This guy gets up for these blocks and he gets up for these dunks and even these like little floaters. He is really really good. And you talk about teams nailing the draft. I mean, I can't recall a team nailing a draft since the days of the Thunder as well as this year for the Grizzlies. And I'm not saying that Morant or Clark will become a Kevin Durant level player, but or even James Harden, but I mean, goodness gracious, Morant looks like the real deal, and Clark looks really, really good for them. And guys are just contributing. DeAnthony Melton has been really, really good. He made Zach Lowe's 10 things this past week. And there's just a lot to like about this team. Jonas Valanciunas is just getting down there and beasting people. None of their guys are playing a ton of minutes. You got to kind of like what the coaching staff has done. So, I mean, I think there's a lot to like. Is there anything that stood out to you so far, Jason, that you're liking about these grit and grind Grizzlies?
The team concept, because like I said earlier, we left this team for dead, and you have 6 guys averaging double figures. 3 of those are your foundational pieces in Jackson, Morant, and Clark. You have Dylan Brooks, who's been there, one of the longest tenured players on the team, in a starting role. He's the only one to have started and played in every game so far on the season, averaging 15 points. Jonas Valanciunas just looks reinvigorated after coming over in a trade from Toronto in the Marcus Gasol trade. And then Jay Crowder, who you mentioned, is a glue guy, and I think he's going to get moved at the trade deadline, regardless of Memphis's playoff position. And we don't know what the hell they're going to do with Andre Iguodala, who hasn't played for them, but it's almost like they could use him. If the season ended today, which is America's favorite line on a podcast, they'd be in the playoffs. So I don't know what they're doing, just paying Iguodala to sit at home. But, you got 6 guys averaging double figures. You have Grayson Allen, who's played in 25 games, averaging almost 8 points. You're a big Tyus Jones guy. He's looked okay. He had 6 spot starts while John Morant was injured. Kyle Anderson, I think, could do a little better. But they have some nice young pieces. And, 3 guys to build around, maybe 4 if they keep Brooks. And, that's their makeup of the future. I think they have to get a young center because Valanciunas is not going to be there forever. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have a lineup of Clark, Brooks, Morant, Jackson Jr., I mean, they got some young studs in the making here.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the team that jumps out to you for Valanciunas is like you almost wonder if a team like the Celtics would take a shot on him too, with what he's been able to give them. I mean, I don't know if he's good enough defensively for them to pull the trigger, but they could use a big man. At any rate, you just have to feel like the Grizzlies and that front office have really played things right here because you talked about Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala, and we're gonna get to some other teams in a minute, but I mean, don't you feel like there are 5 teams in the Western Conference and maybe even 6 teams in the Eastern Conference? That's 11 teams, and I feel like that many teams genuinely feel like they could win the finals this year. I don't know if Dallas really can win the finals this year. I feel like they're maybe a couple moves away, but I feel like there's a lot of teams in the league right now who genuinely feel like they have a chance to win the title. And that could mean that a team like the Grizzlies, who have a couple assets, could really start to pit some of those contenders against each other and up the offer. I mean, don't you feel like it's turning into a little bit of a seller's market here?
I think so. Because some teams are really bad. But I mean, look, we tend to focus on a lot of the same teams, Lakers and Bulls and the Nets, our 2 teams. And, we talk a lot of Knicks and we talk a lot of Clippers and Bucks and Sixers. So, like, do you hear the teams we're discussing tonight? Utah, OKC, Memphis. Like, we're getting around to these teams that are opening the eyes of a lot of fans and pundits because the league is so healthy right now and there's a ton of parity that's what's making it watchable. This is the time of year where the NBA really ramps up. Football season's almost over. College is over. College basketball fans, people that maybe don't watch the NBA are watching, because March Madness is right around the corner. But this is the NBA's time to shine. It's January. The holidays are
Yeah.
over. And you're seeing a lot of these teams putting themselves on the map the way they're playing. And I just think it's great for the league as a whole.
Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right because the Bulls just reached the halfway point of their season. A lot of teams are getting there, and that really speaks to the fact that we're pretty deep into the season so far. So you're absolutely right.
Does
Um,
that make you blissful or bullish?
well, I guess this is where we can start here. Uh, we're going to talk about the teams that are not so hot, Jason, and I guess the Bulls are a good place to start because there was there was recently an article on one of the big Bulls blogs about how halfway through the season we don't know anything more about the Bulls than when we started the season, and if their rebuild has gotten anywhere, and that's pretty much exactly where we are. All that we know is that Zach LaVine should be an all-star, Jason. That's the one thing I'm going to say off this team. I want Zach LaVine in the all-star game in Chicago. Other than that, there's not a lot of bright spots. Wendell Carter was playing pretty well. He's now on the mend. Um, I I was very I've been very interested to watch Kobe White. He's probably the other guy here that'll be fun to watch for Bulls fans, but he does take some just abysmal shots. So we'll see. There's not a lot to be blissful about. It's pretty bluesy right now. But if we can see Zach LaVine on the All Star game, Jason, and he is a great All Star game person, given that he has a propensity for deep threes and big dunks. But that's about the brightest the spot can get. Meanwhile, I think your Nets are having some ups and downs, shall we say? I don't know. Would you put them in the hot or the not?
So with the Nets, right? I mean, look, they had a really rough stretch. They lost 7 in a row. And then, of course, I'm going to vent for a little bit because it's one of my childhood friends, Joey. We went on his bachelor party, and he's a huge Knicks fan. So first things first, we were like, all right, well, let's book it when the Knicks are in Miami. That didn't happen. Let's go to any Heat game. Then by the time we picked the weekend, we realized the Heat were in both Brooklyn and New York. So, it sucked because we couldn't go to the American Airlines Arena and watch. But that said, because they were playing in New York, we were able to see both games. So Friday night, before going out, I was able to watch the end of the Nets Heat game, and that was probably their most impressive win of the season. Karis LeVert was hitting some step back clutch shots, and they got a win over the Heat. And then, after Kyrie Irving was thought to be lost for the season, he surprises everyone, suits up against the Hawks, which didn't have Trae Young, and they blew the doors off them. So it was a nice 2-game stretch for Brooklyn, winning 2 games in a row, getting back in the 7th seed. Right now they're down 8 to Utah with 6.5 to go. Kyrie just hit a shot, so I'm not going to talk about tonight's game unless it's over before we finish recording. But, I think Kyrie's return is exactly what the Nets needed. Bumps up the rotation. I like that Atkinson is playing Dinwiddie with him because I don't know if you saw the voting returns, Ben, but Kyrie Irving is still voted in as an all-star starter right now, which is blowing my mind because he does not deserve it over Kemba Walker. No way. And Dinwiddie could make it as a reserve. It could come down to Dinwiddie or Levine for the last couple spots, and that would be a toss-up because, Dinwiddie's looked great, and Zach LaVine, I think, is 5th in the league in total points, so going to be an interesting debate there. But, I'm a little encouraged by the Nets. Whatever happens tonight against the red-hot Utah team, fine. It's just nice to see Kyrie get his legs under, and they have a tough back-to-back. They go right to Philly to play the Sixers. Little preview for our marquee matchups, but Kyrie might rest for load management, so we might have to remove it. But yeah, all in all, I'm just glad Kyrie's back. He looks healthy, and now I'm just ready to see where this team goes with 2 of their 3 big 3 back and in action.
Yeah, I think that the Nets are actually a great way to kind of transition from hot to not, or at least kind of go between the two because the Nets have certainly been not very hot with Kyrie out. They've had moments, and now with Kyrie coming back, there is a real question of where the Nets are going to finish. I think, a lot of Nets fans, including yourself, really tempered expectations. And with that injury, it ended up being a benefit because the Nets just, one of the things we've seen is that they just don't really have enough offense. They don't have enough playmakers on this team to win without their stars. And ultimately, when Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving come back, it's going to be a completely different team because suddenly Spencer Dinwiddie is going to go from being an underqualified number 1 guy who has to get all the offense to being the 3rd guy. And suddenly Joe Harris isn't going to have to run that much pick and roll. He's going to be just spotting up. And suddenly, Jared Allen is going to have wide open dunks, and DeAndre Jordan is going to have wide open dunks left and right because guys are going to have to double those other two guys that we mentioned in Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. So I think it's a great way to kind of transition. But unfortunately, Jason, we've talked about some of the good. I think it's time to move on to the bad. We talked about the wins that the Nets and Knicks had, and the loser of those games, as you mentioned, was the Miami Heat. And I think that's a great place to start here because this was a team that's been really doing well, and now suddenly they lose to two teams that, really I think they were expected to beat. And it comes on the heels of some kind of up and down play. They lost to the Wizards, they lose to the Magic. I mean, what's wrong with the Heat, Jason? And do you think that they can kind of turn this back around, or do they need to make a move if they want to stay in contention?
Well, first of all, I'm going to do what I never do, and that's shout out the New York Knicks on a big win. I mean, the Nets put them on their heels, and then, the Heat come into the Garden, and they led the whole game, and then the Knicks just hit all the right shots down the stretch. Julius Randle played well. Frank's been playing well. Bobby Portis, Elfrid Payton. That's enough, though. I can't compliment the Knicks too much. I mean, they're 11-29, but that was a good win over a team that was 27-11 coming into that matchup. So it's enough to be encouraged about if you're a Knicks fan. But for the Heat, I mean, my question is, like, have they peaked too early? We've talked about Bam and the fit next to Jimmy Butler and the complement of players with Dragic playing at a really high level. It's like, have they peaked too early? There was a really good feature on ESPN.com today about how Pat Riley, is kind of tried to accelerate the team's rebuild and getting a superstar and having Bam kind of evolve into that second star and then maybe needing one more big piece. And then they'll really be in Eastern Conference playoff contention. But right now, being 27-12, they're comfortably in the 3 seed, 2 games ahead of Toronto. They are still good enough to make some noise, but this is a midseason swoon, and there's really no denying it.
I mean, I think it's less that they peaked too soon and more just that they hit a wall because they don't have talent on their back end. They've been plugging guys in, but the guys who they're plugging in just they're not that good. And with all due respect to some of the guys here, Goran Dragic, he's just not. He can't be your second best offensive player. He just can't be. And that's really where they rely on him, and that is asking an awful lot of him. It's asking an awful lot of Kendrick Nunn to keep up what he's been doing. I mean, these are just guys that I think that they're just squeezing water out of stones here, and it's really tough because they have a lot of these sort of one-dimensional players. I think Tyler Hero is a guy who's going to really develop, but Duncan Robinson is just a pure shooter, and that's really his role on the court. And as much as Spoelstra's done a great job getting creative, they need another guy who that they can really get some offense out of. I love the idea of Kyle Lowry coming to the Heat, but as of right now, they're struggling just because there's not that many guys who can really get them good shots out of the flow of the offense. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes Bam Adebayo can go down in the post and be a facilitator, but Jason, smart teams and good defensive teams are not that worried about a Bam Adebayo post up. It's just that's not a great offensive player. And
I'm terribly concerned.
What that means though, Jason, is Jimmy Butler is doing a lot of isolation against these good teams. And they're asking him to go one-on-one. And as you and I both know, when you have a guy going one-on-one, it doesn't create a lot of mismatches elsewhere on the floor unless you draw a double team a la James Harden. And when Butler's able to do that, great. But I don't know that he's at the phase of his career where he's going to be able to do that night after night. And that means the Heat, in my opinion, need some help, or I think they're going to have some big trouble, especially with guys like Victor Oladipo coming back to the Pacers and Kyrie Irving coming back to the Nets. I mean, there's teams behind them in the standings that I think are going to start playing better, and I think that's going to be a big problem for the Heat going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. But I do think their improvement will come from within if Hero and Nunn and a lot of these other young guys on the roster continue to develop. You have Chris Silva too, who I think is another guy that, showing some potential. They got rid of Deion Waiters, and they still have solid veterans there with Olenek Johnson, Jones, Justice Winslow getting that second contract, only having played in 11 games Jimmy Butler's just been great. So, hopefully it's just a wall, as you said, and that the Heat will be all right in the end.
Absolutely, Jason. I mean, is there anyone else in the league that you felt like you're